A simple black dress, a seemingly harmless class reunion invitation. But the moment she stepped into that room, the filthy past came roaring back, and their biggest mistake was thinking she was still the girl no one remembered. They had no idea who she is now. The email from Harper Lane arrived on a Friday morning, nestled among hundreds of shareholder meeting invites, investment drafts, and departmental reports. Sutton, our class is holding a 20-year reunion in Chicago. I'd love for you to come. She read the lines repeatedly, unsure whether it was the city's name or the word reunion that tightened her chest. Sutton Hale paused, her finger on the screen, her deep brown eyes fixed on the small corner where the words flickered with distant memories. A sunlit classroom, solitary laughter, indifferent glances from behind chairs. She thought she'd moved on. That becoming the head of one of the nation's largest private equity funds was the final answer to all those years of being overlooked and belittled. But that invitation, simple, unadorned, cracked open a fissure, smoldering and uneasy, like a cold wind whistling through an old door's gap. She didn't plan to go. Darien Wolfe had said, "If you don't want to, skip it. Those people don't matter anymore." But Sutton wasn't seeking meaning. She sought peace. A part of her still wanted to walk into that room, not to prove her success, but to see if the memories still held the same shape as they did 20 years ago. In a drawer, a classic black dress lay still, no brand, no name, just like her back then. She loosely braided her long auburn hair, spritzed a faint mist of old perfume, and slid into the car with a feeling caught between longing and caution. The car glided into the Marriott's parking lot like a silent streak amid the vibrant night city. Standing before the lobby, Sutton tightened her grip on her bag strap. The chandeliers in the distant ballroom gleamed like thousands of eyes waiting not for her, but for an old, nameless, worthless version of her they once. Each step echoed softly on the marble floor, blending with faint music and laughter she recognized, the carefree laughter of those who'd never had their worth questioned. As the reunion room's door opened, she took a deep breath, telling herself she was here to look back, not to belong. But despite her preparation, Sutton Hale couldn't escape the feeling that she'd just stepped into a tailored nightmare, perfectly fitted and as cold as the day she was first forgotten. "Well, look who's here." A lazy male voice cut through the soft music drifting in the gold-trimmed ballroom, rising from the bar. Chase Maddox, hair slicked back, a beer in hand, flashed the smug grin Sutton Hale knew all too well. "Sutton freaking Hale. Still as useless as ever, huh?" He laughed loudly, each word a sharp needle piercing the past. Heads turned, attention flaring like fire on dry grass. Sutton offered a faint smile, about to respond, when Chase sauntered closer, the stench of beer and cheap cologne hitting her face. "What's with that dress? Boring as always? Looks dirt poor." His mocking laugh sparked a chorus of snickers, spreading like a fever. In minutes, the high school circle she thought had dissolved, reformed around her, like sharks smelling blood. Brielle Voss glided in, platinum hair cascading, her red dress clinging to her frame, eyes glinting with challenge. "My God, did you borrow your mom's dress?" "This isn't a Salvation Army party," she cackled, flicking Sutton's braid lightly, reviving old bullying games. "Who let her in here?" Colby Knox bellowed from a nearby table, his voice the same but brasher. "Probably still living in that old trailer. Here for free snacks?" Sutton gripped her bag tighter, eyes scanning for an escape, but the only way out was where she stood, centered, composed, yet alone. "Remember when you followed me around like a puppy?" Chase pressed on, stepping closer. "Even in bed you were as dull as dishwater." He nodded at Brielle, and they burst into laughter. The crowd roared, no one stopping them, not a single person. Tanner Briggs, now balding but still loud, as a megaphone raised his glass and shouted, "Still leeching off someone, Sutton, or just begging for scraps?" A sharp "ha" echoed somewhere as Brielle yanked the bag from Sutton's hand, holding it up like a trophy. "Let's see what's in here. Coupons? Food stamps?" She dumped the contents onto the floor. Wallet, phone, keys, everything scattered across the liquor-slick surface. Colby kicked the wallet aside, empty. Just like her. They laughed. Sutton knelt, hands trembling, picking up each item. She didn't speak, didn't react. She didn't cry. The one thing they couldn't take. But inside a storm began to churn, not from pain, but because they were the same as ever. And she, though changed, was still drowned by a crowd that never knew boundaries. The sound of a glass shattering somewhere served as an unspoken signal, and everything crossed the line from mockery to malice. Tanner Briggs lumbered forward, his bulky frame swaying to the old music, and without warning, he shoved Sutton Hale into the cocktail table behind her. She hit it hard, her hips slamming against the edge, sending a cascade of glasses tumbling like broken dreams. "Get out of the way, you loser," he growled. "You're an eyesore." Not a single word of protest, not one hand reached to stop him. The people who once shared cafeteria benches with her now watched as if enjoying a cheap drama. Sutton struggled to stand, a sharp pain shooting from her hip, making her lean slightly. But her eyes remained steady, unshaken. Brielle Voss approached, feigning clumsiness, then accidentally bumped Sutton's arm, splashing a full martini onto her dress. "Oops, but wetsuits you." Her voice dripped, sweet as cheap wine. The crowd erupted in laughter. Someone threw a napkin at Sutton's face. "Wipe it off, trash," Colby Knox barked, tossing another handful. Like dominoes, they joined in, throwing, yanking, shoving, filming. Chase Maddox closed in, so near Sutton could see the bloodshot veins in his eyes. "Enough, Sutton. You're embarrassing yourself. No one here wants you. Get out." He raised his hand, rallying an invisible army. "Come on, let's get her out." They cheered, a vile chant, swarming like wolves circling prey. She tried to speak. "I leave if—" But Brielle cut her off, shoving her toward the door. "Go, trash." It didn't end there. Colby grabbed a fistful of cocktail napkins and flung them at her face, a cold, wet slap of fabric. Chase smirked, seizing her braid and yanking hard, making her gasp. "Get lost, pathetic," he hissed, as he and Tanner kicked at her shoes, nearly tripping her. Phones were raised, capturing every moment like a lopsided MMA fight being live-streamed. The ballroom door slammed shut behind her, ejecting her from that gilded world. Her dress soaked, hair disheveled, hands clutching her mangled bag, Sutton Hale stood in the silent hallway, their laughter echoing like a dull knife scraping memory's walls. She didn't turn back, didn't scream or sob. She pulled out her phone and sent a short message. "The reunion was a bust. They threw me out." The reply came within seconds. "What did they do?" "I'm coming now." Sender Darien Wolfe. And in that quiet moment after the message, the storm began to shift. But this time it wasn't a storm crashing down on her. It was a reckoning poised to engulf the ballroom behind her. In the ballroom, shimmering with chandelier light, the echoes of mocking laughter still lingered over half-empty champagne flutes. Chase Maddox stood among old friends, chuckling with glee as he recounted the historic eviction. Brielle Voss wiped a martini stain from her dress, her lips still savoring unvoiced taunts. None of them suspected that the door they'd just slammed to cast someone out was about to swing open in a way they couldn't fathom. Marla Kinsey, the evening's MC, stepped up to the microphone under the hazy glow. Her voice was bright, oblivious to the seismic shift she was about to trigger. "Everyone," she sang out, "before we continue, I want to give a special thank you to the person who funded tonight's entire reunion. Thanks to them, we're here, in this stunning venue with food, music, lights, everything." A thin mist of silence spread. "Please give a round of applause for Sutton Hale, president of Horizon Capital." The words dropped like a stone into a seemingly still lake. Glasses froze at lips, laughter choked in throats. Chase Maddox's face hardened, a plaster statue struck by an iron hammer. "What?" "The hell?" Brielle Voss blurted, her wine glass slipping from her fingers, splashing onto her crimson dress. Colby Knox stared at the stage, the smirk gone from his eyes, replaced by a hollow void. The ballroom door opened. No fanfare, no music, just the figure of a woman in a still damp black dress, auburn hair slightly disheveled, her face devoid of theatrics, but carrying a weight that thickened the air. Sutton Hale walked in as if she'd never been forced out. Silent, composed, each step a soundless slap, and then, behind her, like a declaration of presence, Darien Wolfe appeared. Light glinted off his swept-back black hair, his charcoal suit hugging a towering frame, his eyes sharp as forged steel. No introduction needed, no business card required. The room knew him by the way he stood beside her, as if the world revolved around him. But tonight he stood still for one person alone. "You okay, babe?" Darien Wolfe asked, loud enough for the room to hear. Sutton nodded calmly. "I'm fine." He kissed her forehead lightly, his gaze never leaving the stunned crowd. Then he turned, his voice cold as honed steel. "Who's Chase?" In that instant, the opulent ballroom transformed into a courtroom, and those who had laughed now trembled like defendants without counsel, facing a verdict they never saw coming. "Who is Chase Maddox?" Darien Wolfe's voice wasn't loud, but each word carried the sharpness of a blade slicing through the refined, arid air of the room. The crowd fell silent. Chase Maddox, the man who had been rallying to kick someone out less than an hour ago, now raised his hand like a schoolboy called to recite a lesson. "I'm Mommy Chase." Darien turned his head, no trace of a smile. "So, you're the one who called my wife useless." Threw water on her, pushed her out of the room that her own money paid for. Chase forced a nervous laugh. "It was just a joke. I didn't." Darien's laugh was the only thing more terrifying than his silence. He pulled out his phone, dialing swiftly without looking. "Remy, it's me. Chase Maddox applied to Grayson last week. Cancel it, wipe it clean, blacklist his name, every department, every affiliate." He hung up, sealing the execution. Brielle Voss shrank back, but Darien's gaze was already on her. "You? In the red dress, the one who threw the wine, right?" His voice didn't need to raise, it was enough to be direct. She stammered, I didn't mean to." "No matter, I did." Darien made another quick call. "Ashton, Brielle Voss, Realtor, uses our brokerage network, doesn't she? Pull her license through our connections. All related records. Invalidate them." He ended the call. Her face turned ashen. Colby Knox and Tanner Briggs stood frozen like statues as Darien turned to them. "And you too? Napkin guy and loudmouth. Applied for any jobs yet? Go ahead and try. Your names are now flagged red across my entire system." Tanner blurted, "It was just a joke." "No one meant. Think harder now," Darien replied, his voice sharp as honed steel. His hand gripped Sutton Hale's waist, claiming her without words. She stood beside him, her dress still damp, hair disheveled, but her eyes blazed, not with anger, but with the deep certainty of someone who knew they were protected beyond question. Chase made one last attempt, stepping forward, his eyes glistening. "Sutton, come on, we have a history." She looked straight at him, her gaze as still as a winter lake. "You no longer have the right to say my name." Darien tightened his hold on her waist, speaking plainly, no embellishments needed. "She's Sutton Wolfe, my wife, and forever out of your reach." Around them, the clinking of glasses stopped. Those who had cheered earlier now barely dared to breathe. Darien Wolfe didn't need to shout. He destroyed others with two things alone: calm and absolute power. And that night he wielded both, for the one woman he would never let stand alone again. The hotel corridor still glowed with warm light, but the space was empty after the earthquake that had just swept through. Sutton Hale stood beside Darien Wolfe, his hand resting lightly on her back, a silent promise that he was there and wasn't going anywhere. She thought it was over, But the past, like cowards, never retreats quietly. The clatter of footsteps echoed from the staircase. A familiar, hoarse voice called out behind them. "Sutton? Wait." Chase Maddox appeared, his shirt unbuttoned, his gelled hair now a sweaty mess. Gone was the arrogance, replaced by the face of a drowning man clinging to his last straw. I didn't know who you were, I swear. If I had, you knew I was the one you called useless," she cut in, her voice as steady as a frozen lake. "But if I lose my job for real, I'll have nothing left," Chase stammered. "Please, don't let him do this." The sharp click of heels hurried closer. Brielle Voss, her dress still stained with wine, pushed forward, eyes red and voice trembling. "Sutton, I'm sorry I crossed the line. I didn't think things would go this far." She stepped closer, her shaking hand reaching for Sutton's arm. "We didn't mean to hurt you like this, honestly." Sutton Hale took half a step back. No outburst, no swatting away, just a refusal to engage. She looked at them, two figures who had once laughed at her pain, now standing there, clothes disheveled, eyes dazed like children stripped of their toys. "You chose to treat me like garbage when you thought I was nothing. Now that you know who I am, you think I'll take pity?" Chase clung on. "I'm about to lose my house, everything. Just give me a chance." Sutton met his gaze directly. No venom, no scorn, just a clean, uncompromising end. "You called me useless, a burden, pushed me out of the door I paid to open. Whatever you're begging for, it's too late." Darien Wolfe stepped forward, positioning himself in front of his wife. No need to raise his voice, just one sentence, sealing it all. "She's spoken. Leave." There they stood, Chase Maddox and Brielle Voss under the hotel's lights, like two ruins fallen from a hollow monument, and Sutton Hale, in the corridor's soft glow, felt for the first time that night a strange lightness, as if she had finally cast the weight of a past era into an abyss and firmly sealed it shut. Monday morning began like any other, but for some, the sun never truly rose. Chase Maddox sat in his rented low-rise apartment in the West Loop, staring at the final rejection email from a company he once dreamed of joining. "We regret to inform you that your application has been declined after a review of our affiliate verification system." A single line, but enough to shatter the spine of the smugness that had once defined him. Across the city, Brielle Voss was in freefall during a call from her real estate agency manager. "Your license is under review. Multiple partners have withdrawn listings tied to you. I advise you to halt operations until further notice." The phone screen went dark, leaving only the pale reflection of Brielle, lips bitten bloody, trembling fingernails swiping the screen as if she could erase the fate already written. Colby Knox received an invitation for a private chat from the director of the car dealership where he worked. "We know what happened at the reunion. There's video. There are posts. Customers don't want to be associated with that image. You're a risk to the brand." All the high school football medals hanging in his room couldn't save him from the final handshake. "Good luck, Colby." And Tanner Briggs, once the loudest of them all, was now eerily silent. He received a termination text in the middle of a meeting with a potential client. "Due to negative media feedback, your current contract is terminated, effective immediately." Attached was a link to a video, him shoving Sutton Hale into a table, his laughter ringing, clear as day. One by one, like dominoes nudged at the tip, they fell without grasping who had set the wave in motion. None of them knew exactly whose hand had signed the order, but they all knew it could only be Darien Wolfe, and behind him was a network they never dreamed would turn against them. Sutton Hale didn't need to speak. She didn't comment. She posted nothing on social media, not a single reply to the flood of public apologies clogging the reunion group chat. Her silence was the sharpest cut and the deepest. Those who had once circled her like predators were now reeling in a whirl tightening around their throats. They thought they had pushed a weak woman out of the room, but in the end, they were the ones locked out, and the room now belonged to a queen they would never have the chance to enter again. The automatic glass doors of Horizon Capital's headquarters slid open with a low hum, cutting off the clamor of traffic from the boulevard outside. Sutton Hale stepped out, holding a folder of documents, her attire crisp, her gaze as calm as ever. But ahead, right in the middle of the stone-paved walkway, two figures she had long banished from her mind stood waiting, their faces so haggard they were barely recognizable. Chase Maddox wore a crumpled shirt, his gaunt face hollowed out, hands clenched as if holding himself together to keep from falling apart. Beside him, Brielle Voss was a shadow of her former self, no longer in a glamorous gown but in sweatpants, hair hastily tied up, mascara smudged around her eyes. "Sutton, please, just hear us out for 1 minute," Chase rasped, his voice hoarse, as if he'd spoken too much to too few who would listen. Sutton stopped. She didn't step forward or back. She just looked. "I've lost it," Chase exhaled. "Everything. My bank account's in the red. My old company won't take me back. My name's flagged across the system. I'm begging you." Brielle couldn't speak anymore. She collapsed to her knees on the cold stone. "I'll do anything. I've ruined everything, literally destroyed. Please, let me survive." Sutton's silence didn't stem from cruelty. It came from clarity, from finally being able to look at those who had trampled her, not with anger but with detachment. "You didn't apologize when I stood there, drenched, with napkins thrown in my face," she said, her voice steady like a general's command. "When you recorded it, cheered, dragged me out of a place I paid for you to enter, did you think about consequences then?" Chase choked out. "If I'd known you were someone who could ruin lives like this." "No," Sutton cut in. "You were wrong from the start. I've never ruined anyone. I just stopped protecting those who treated me like a joke." She looked at Brielle, the woman now curled up, clutching her knees like a child, trembling amidst the bustling city. "I don't hold the key to the door you want to return through. I'm just the one who locked it, and I didn't bring the key." Darien Wolfe emerged from the main lobby at that moment, catching his wife's gaze. No questions needed. He simply placed a hand on her back, his eyes flicking over the two figures before them like they were specks of dust on a windshield. "Let's go," Sutton said, softly. And so they walked away, slowly, naturally, without looking back. Behind them, two faded shadows remained, grasping at a chance they never should have lost if they had ever known how to treat the woman named Sutton Hale like a human being. The Facebook page of the Class of 2004 alumni group started heating up on Tuesday morning, and by noon it had exploded. A few photos from the reunion vanished without a trace. Status updates were hastily edited. Some old posts were deleted entirely. And then the apologies began to trickle in, scattered, clumsy, drowning in a sea of words, like voices lost beneath a torrent of guilt. Colby Knox wrote a lengthy post detailing social pressures and the fear of being swept up by the crowd, ending with, "If I could do it over, I'd choose silence." Brielle Voss shared a post with a black and white photo, quoting a line about kindness, commenting below, "I was wrong. I apologize to her from the bottom of my heart." And Chase Maddox, who once thought himself the center of the room, was left with a feeble confession. "I lost the most important thing, my humanity." While the group drowned in their attempts to make amends, the one person they were addressing was conspicuously absent. Sutton Hale didn't respond. She didn't comment. She didn't heart a single apology. On her personal page, if anyone dared to visit, there were only posts about investment strategies, photos with international partners, and the occasional glimpse of Chicago's skyline from her glass-walled penthouse. Not a word about that night, not a single mention of their names. Sutton's silence wasn't indifference. It was a statement, a boundary. A quiet mirror held up to those who had mocked and jeered, now forced to see nothing but their own shame reflected back. They could apologize, cry, recount their circumstances and regrets, but none of them were granted the privilege of a dialogue. Darien Wolfe didn't speak either. He didn't need to. The names Chase Maddox, Tanner Briggs, Colby Knox, and Brielle Voss had been redlined across the entire network of Grayson Enterprises partners. Job interview calls were politely declined, submitted applications never received a reply. The paths they once thought were forever open had collapsed silently, like a tunnel system with its core removed. In a boardroom on the 45th floor, Sutton Hale sat quietly among a row of financial advisors, discussing capital flows in East Asia. No one in the room knew or dared mention what had happened the previous weekend, because in the world of those who truly hold power, the most terrifying thing isn't anger. It's a silence so cold it freezes. She didn't need to respond. Sometimes saying nothing is the answer that cuts the deepest. That weekend, Chicago's sky draped itself in a faint silver mist, reflecting the lights from towering buildings like a silent ribbon of radiance. On the top floor of the glass-clad building overlooking Lake Michigan, Sutton Hale sat curled up on a sofa, dressed in pale gray athleisure, holding a glass of red wine that shimmered with each tilt. No black dress, no glaring spotlights in her face, just her, a quiet evening, and a man pouring her wine with a gaze warmer than any stage light. Darien Wolfe leaned forward, handing her the glass, then settled beside her. "Still thinking about it?" he asked, not accusing, just a subtle care from someone who always knew how to hold everything together, except his gaze when it came to the woman he loved. Sutton shook her head slightly. "Not anymore. Just thanking myself for not staying silent one more time." She took a sip, her lips curving faintly. "You know, I used to think I needed their validation." Darien leaned back, looking at her as if he could never see enough. "And now?" "Now I realize," she replied, "the greatest pain wasn't being trampled. It was letting them think I wasn't worth protecting." He smiled, a rare smile that, when it appeared, carried the weight of 10 promises. "That's why you have me." "Yeah," she nodded, "and I have myself, too." In the distance, the city hummed with life. News of the firings, revoked licenses, and rejected applications of Chase Maddox, Brielle Voss, Tanner Briggs, and Colby Knox had spread like shadows with nowhere left to hide. But here, in a room bathed in warm golden light, their names went unmentioned. They had been erased from Sutton Hale's mental map like ink smudged in the rain. No longer distinct, no longer worth preserving. "You know," she turned to Darien, her eyes sparkling from the wine and a quiet peace, "I didn't think I'd find happiness in that soaked dress that night. But you were the most powerful person in the room," he said. She laughed softly, resting her head on his shoulder, "Not because I was more powerful than them, but because I didn't need them anymore." And amidst the twinkling lights outside where the city never slept, a woman who had been pushed out of a door that night sat firmly within her own world, secure, loved, and most importantly chosen, not by them, but by herself. Sutton Hale, the woman beyond the black dress, the one who spoke last when no one else dared, and the one that crowd forever would never touch again. After hearing the story of Sutton Hale and Darien Wolfe, we witnessed not only a sweet revenge, but also felt the profound power of silence, self-worth, and true love. The way Sutton faced her past, without shouting, without needing to explain, was the strongest declaration of all. She doesn't need validation to have value. And Darien, the man who entered quietly but made an entire room bow their heads, is proof that when a woman is placed in her rightful place, she shines in a way no one can deny. Thank you for watching Millionaire Heart Stories. We hope today's story touched a part of your heart, reminding you that no matter how the world turns its back, as long as you don't give up on yourself, your day to walk in the light will come. See you on the next journey where stories of resilience, love, and rebirth are always waiting to be told.